where it's just high-rise city. And then you'll see a couple of little single families interspersed in some of the residential neighborhoods. But I mean, that's a typical Berlin apartment dwelling. It's funny because people, well, on the actual German student tour in Germany, somebody said one time, "Gosh, there's not much landscaping." And generally, in the late spring and late summer, the grass is cut. The rest of the time, they just let things kind of grow wild. It's expensive to mow grass, and there's really not that much grass anyhow. But the Germans sort of feel, hey, weeds are plants too. So you get used to that. And when we first got over this, oh, we got to cut the grass, got to cut the grass. I mean, our German colleagues were saying, what? Do you want to spend money to cut the grass? And it really turned out to be not so important in the end. That's a cultural difference that you just have to sometimes adjust to. This is a much more basic building. This building has no balconies, and so probably the units in this building are somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 35 to 50 square meters. Very small apartments. Same here. Just very cookie cutter. Unfortunately, we made some, because there was such pressure to build high-rise housing quickly, buildings that look like this, those are not tile facades, they're actually aluminum panels that beneath that is very thick asbestos insulation. So to do any kind of remodeling, refurbishing a facade, it just gets incredibly expensive. Their asbestos disposal laws are more onerous than they are here, and rightly so, because there's so much. I'm going to take a quick look at some of the pre-World War II buildings that are generally beautiful. There's not a lot of them in Berlin, but they're very prime buildings because they sort of retain that early turn of the century architecture, which is reflective all over Europe. And on this, actually, sorry. I think that was yeah, that's the last slide on this. So let me get out of this, and we'll go back to the next part of this presentation. We got more. Here we go. I hope it comes up. Yeah, here we go. That's, well, why is that not up on the screen? Let's go. There we go. This is another building that was the same on the last book of slides that we pulled up. This project is over 600 units, many buildings, and it was called Krankenhaus Viertel, which Krankenhaus means hospital, and Viertel means quarter. So this was a hospital quarter. There was a real medical community, including a medical school even before World War I, and the medical community and the government built this whole project for their doctors, nurses, students, and so forth, and still retains that name, but it's not a medical center anymore. This particular picture, Dr. Goss, we went here twice. This is called Holland, and it's at this particular time in the 20s when this was built, they had a temporary shortage in building materials and imported a lot of brick from the Netherlands, and so that's why it's called Holland Quarter. And this has all been condominiumized and was one of the more popular areas in Berlin. This is a typical apartment house from the 30s. This building had no balconies. You can see one has been, the facade has been painted as opposed to the building building next door, where it's been probably 30, 40 years since that building had any work on it. For those of you that are in building construction and have any training or courses in architecture, these next several buildings are from the Bauhaus builders, very prevalent in the 20s and 30s in Weimar, Germany, and this is by the architect Bruno Taub. You can Google him, and these buildings are all what they call Denkmalschutz. I don't know where that, but anyhow, that means the same as a listed building here. It's on the German Historical Register, and you can't do anything to a building like this except exactly reproduce its original facade, and many of them, it includes the interiors of the buildings. You can maybe move a wall with special permission or something like that if you own the apartment, but the stairways, the paintings, and the entry foyer and all that have to be completely restored, so that's a very expensive deal. That's another view of the same building. But that's a pretty quality building, and that's from the early 30s. This is another Bruno Taub building, and here it's interesting about the colors. That's the color that he prescribed when that building was built, I think in 1937 or 38, and it's just been redone, but you had to do the original color. All right, so we're going to take a look at now some of the buildings that were built after the war, and these slides got a little bit scrambled. This is not 60s to 90s. This is really 90s buildings. So you can see that even though they're only building from 2,500 to 5,000 units a year since the mid-90s, there is some interesting architecture, more reflective of what you might call, a modern apartment building in many parts of the world. They're quite nice. It's joked among the Bauhaus architects that are still alive that this was all done by student architects, but it's really quite charming in some of the quiet neighborhoods in Berlin, and quite modern. These buildings probably still wouldn't have kitchens because people that can afford to buy or rent in a building like this would want to personalize their kitchen. So, no Formica. The people that own here would probably have granite. So, we also visited this project on both of the Virginia Tech tours. This is rather stark, but it's modern, and this is not really the best view. But this project is called Pulvermüller, which means powder mill. And for World War I and World War II, this is where many munitions were produced for the German government. And this whole site lay vacant for 40 years, and finally they got in there and they cleaned it up and allowed people to live there. They even finally got clearance about 5 or 6 years ago to allow children to live there who can play outside, but you still can't plant fruits or vegetables on this land. We're still concerned environmentally because of the old chemical impurities that leached into the ground. All right, so I want to take a look. I talked about location being important. Most of these are also old buildings, but when we talked about the Mietspiegel, the rent mirror, the German publication that tells you what you can rent for a specific unit in a specific neighborhood, and it's not only that. There are 40 different points on the Mietspiegel. When was the last time the bathroom was renovated, if ever? Does it have a south-facing balcony? Is it on a noisy street? You'll see a building where it's on a Straßenbahn line, which is very noisy. Do they have tile in the bathroom? Is the staircase wooden or marble? Is there an elevator in the building? Is it a flat roof or a tile roof? All these different things go into the formula that prescribes the specific rent for a building. So even some of these buildings, if they're not very pretty, in all cases, they're on a quiet street and have a nice fit out, and they're considered really prime. Any of these buildings, you probably could just step out of your door and get on the subway, or catch a bus, Straßenbahn or whatever. Here's a building that probably was built in the early 60s or late 50s, but also this is an apartment building with 6 units. It's probably near some single family, so it's a very prime location. And if you see some really strange colors, sometimes that's because it's a listed building, and the building has to be painted that way. But this beats a lot of gray, because still about maybe 40% of the apartment buildings in Berlin have the paint's just all weathered off, so they're just gray stucco. All right, so this is some of the typical, in Berlin they say there's 80% of the people are middle class. These are people that have 1 or 2 workers in the family. They live in 60 square meters, 600 square feet. They may or may not have a small car. But the thing about 80% middle class, there's not a lot of class envy here. I mean, everybody makes somewhere between 40 and 60,000 euros. That's a lot of money in dollars. That can be $50,000 to $80,000 a year. But keep in mind, they're paying tax rates over 40%. There's a 19% sales tax. There's a tax on everything. If you have a pet, if you have a TV, if you have 2 TVs, it's a double tax. If you go to church, it's a tax. Tax. And so that's why, even though people make a pretty good base salary, everybody's just sort of the same, And this is a typical neighborhood, and they're fairly cookie cutter, and some are better than others. This is a building that was actually built before 1920, and for some reason it's also brick. But I can tell you, in this building, it's very basic, very basic. Probably has concrete floors covered by linoleum. Now this would be a building that gets a very low score on the Mietspiegel. You're not going to be able to charge a lot of rent here because it's right on the Straßenbahn line, and those streetcars will be passing, every 10 or 15 minutes, and it's very noisy. Plus, it's a high traffic street. You can see the graffiti. It's not really a world-class neighborhood. Very difficult to find a place to park in the typical. And then we have one more quick. I just wanted to show you this because this was so interesting to your colleagues that came over the last 2 trips. These are some pictures of some bathrooms. All right, so this would be a typical bathroom, but you will know that it's a modernized bathroom because the construction people know this. They have what they call chase walls. When this building was built, all the plumbing was exposed because when they built these tilt wall and concrete shell buildings, they just drilled holes through the floors and walls and ran the pipes on the outside. When 30, 40 years later, when they get remodeled, they'll build these chase walls to hide some of the plumbing. But that's it. Everything's white. You can go to the equivalent of a Lowe's or a Home Depot. It's called Obi over there, and some other building stores. You can buy this white tile everywhere. And now in this one, it's another remodel. But look how tight this bathroom is. Just about 1 meter wide. That's 39 inches. And so you have you have a lavatory. The tub is configured so you just have a little room to sit when you're using other facilities. But it's a quite nice quality bathroom. The bathrooms were so basic and in many cases non-existent in buildings built before the wall. That's why normally sometimes just a small portion of a room or a closet was converted to a bathroom.
Bob, what are those on the sides of that?
Those are hot and cold water meters, and with shut-off valves above. Now you see there's a shower there. That's a shower actually that you could stand in. Most of the time, people sit in the bathtub and use a shower head, but they don't provide. Where would you put a shower curtain there? I mean, the good thing you have a tile floor because there's usually a drain in the floor, or you just kind of mop it up. Very, very unusual to have two lavatories in a bathroom. So brother and sister can brush teeth together in the morning, which, believe me, really helps, because when you're in a family with two adults and two kids, I mean, getting ready for school and work in the morning is a deal. And people really have schedules that, you know, dad's in there at 5:30, mom's in there 4 to 6, and, you know, and that's the way it works. And if you have an emergency, you deal with it. So this one is a little bit of an older refurb, but it still has the heating plumbing. You notice here, that window this would indicate this is the early 60s building. That window has no double glazing, so it's an old wooden window with a single pane of glass. So there's a little bit energy loss there. Just another view. This one actually has a little bit of a beige tile. That's really stepping out. And this is the bathroom in an occupied unit where a little bit of a flare of decoration, a nice curtain and some plastic flowers. But you see here how the plumbing is exposed. That bathroom has not been. Okay, so that's here's another example of the non-glazed window. That would be a downstairs ground level flat because it has the opaque glass. And that's it. I'd like to open it up for questions if we have a little
Yeah,
time.
we have about 5 minutes for questions, so what kind of questions do you have for Bob?
Yes.
What type of complaints arise in the apartments, like, what are common things that go wrong?
Common things that go wrong. A lot of complaints about barking dogs because there's no pet restrictions, and every German has a dog. And so sometimes when they leave for work and leave a dog, they get up and we'll complain about that. Not so much in terms of wild parties. Some of the older buildings that have not been refurbished, there are times when you have